Hello everybody, I'm back. And yes, I know it's been a while. I've been quite busy with work and just other commitments, so I just haven't been able to get around to doing anything. Today I wanted to take a quick look at my own sort of expansion purchase guide. Now, just some caveats. This is obviously my own opinion. It's going to be quite subjective. No doubt you'll disagree with me on a number of these things. So as I say, just bear in mind that this is my own sort of subjective opinion. And then lastly as well, this is from the perspective of a UK-based player. And you might think, why is that relevant? But it will come up. And some of you may already guessed why that's going to be relevant, referring to an expansion purchase guide. So let's just get straight into it. And I'm going to start with the core set. And the core set, I think, is in the minimum requirements. And what I mean by each of these, so essential is something that I think every Smash Up player should own. A good addition. They aren't quite essential, but they're certainly above the kind of baseline. They're expansions you should be looking to pick up if you can, because the factions within them are a good addition, or maybe there's one faction that's bad, but the other three are really, really excellent. So you might want to consider picking this one up. Minimum requirements, I think, is an absolute baseline. There's good things and bad things about the expansion. However, I think every Smash Up player should have them as a bare minimum. But as I say, they aren't necessarily essential. They aren't the best expansion, let's say, in terms of from a purchasing perspective. Wait for a sale. That should be fairly obvious. The ones that I don't think are overly necessary and maybe you can pick up when they're on a deal. AEG often have a 2-for-1 on Smash Up expansions. And then not necessary, I think, are ones that you can pass on. I don't think you need them if you want to have a good sort of Smash Up experience. By all means, you don't need to own everything in this game. It is one of those sort of games where if you do enjoy it, you will be inclined to try and buy everything. That's just kind of, I suppose, human nature and the collector part of all of us. But as I say, there are elements that I think you don't need to own, and I don't think you necessarily are any the poorer for not owning those in your Smash Up experience. So that's where those ones come in. Some of them may be a bit confused. These are just sort of headings I thought of for a tier list. So the core set, I think, is a minimum requirement. It's the one that kicked it all off. The reason I think it's the minimum requirement are that on the positives, you have 8 factions in the expansion. You've got some of the kind of all-time classic factions in there as well. So you've got robots and zombies, which are very popular. You've got aliens, which I think are quite powerful. You've got some mid-tier ones as well, like ninjas and pirates. But you've generally got a good baseline here. You get the 8 factions, which is good value for money anyway. Some of them I don't think have held up very well over time. So factions like wizards, dinosaurs, I don't think have particularly, the power of the game has very slowly crept up, and I don't think they've really held up to the day. There are some ruling inconsistencies, some wording inconsistencies as well. It's a set that I think should be re-released as a second edition. We've got the 10th year anniversary coming up. I think that could possibly be on the cards. However, as I say, I think it's one that eventually every Smash Up owner should have. It's likely to be the first one that you'll ever own, because why would you buy an expansion and not buy the core set? But as I say, yeah, I think it's a decent addition to the game. I'm going to move straight into possibly a controversial one here. I'm going to go for Smash Up Marvel. Now, I can absolutely see people putting this in not necessary, because if you don't like Marvel, or if you don't like some of the changes that they've made in Smash Up Marvel, such as calling them characters and modifiers and things like that, I can see this being a not necessary for you. I actually think this is a good addition. If I was saying to someone today and they liked Marvel, I would say get this as your first set. Don't bother getting the core set, because I actually think the factions in Smash Up Marvel are all pretty good. Maybe Sinister Six and Spider-Verse are probably on the weaker end, but in general, I think they're all, it's a very good set. The power level's quite high. You get your 8 factions again. I think it's slightly more expensive than the core set, but there's not really much in it. So I think this is a really good value for money expansion. And as I say, it's come out much later in the release cycle for the game, so the factions have maybe been tuned more in line with the power level at which they came out. And also as well, It comes with a more up-to-date rulebook. It's changed some of the rules, and I think I just like some of the updated. So I like character, I like modifier as well. So I think this one, I would definitely say go for Marvel rather than go for the core set if you're jumping into the game for the first time. So we may as well pick off the other 8 faction set, which is Munchkin. And for anyone who's seen any of my videos on the channel or know anything about me, you won't be surprised to hear me put this in the not necessary category. And again, it's good value for money. You get your 8 factions. It's, for a similar price to the other expansions, you get good value there. However, this one is very out there in terms of smash up. It's quite different. So you've got your monsters, you've got your treasures. They're 2 separate mechanics. 4 other factions, I think it is, can't be integrated with the rest of the game without including those things. The other 4 can, and people say, well, why don't you just consider it to be, a regular expansion with 4 factions and you can mix those 4 in with the rest of the game? But I'm not particularly sold on that. I don't think that's a very good argument for buying Smash Up Munchkin. I think it's one that's been in and out of print as well, so it can be quite hard to pick up, which can make it potentially more expensive as well, depending on if you're jumping in at a time when it's out of print as compared to being in print. So yeah, I think this one isn't necessary at all. It's got a different art style. It's obviously based on the Munchkin game. If you like Munchkin, you could very easily just buy this as a standalone Smash Up game and not get anything else on this list at all. So if you're in that camp, by all means go ahead and get it. But for me, it's definitely a not necessary in this in my books. And I'm going to move on to quite a few others now, actually. So I'm going to throw in Goblins, Knights of the Round Table, Penguins, and Sheep over in this side as well, because I think that, now I actually haven't played with Goblins and Knights of the Round Table. I don't own those as of December 2021. I do have Penguins, I do have Sheep. The reason I'm putting this in not necessary, and this is the reason why I've mentioned at the start that as a UK-based player, is because these factions aren't really accessible outside of the United States of America, and that's because that's where AEG are located. So if you try and pick up these factions from the store, not only are they $10, which for a single faction is quite expensive anyway, but also you've then got to factor in shipping, potential import costs and things like that. And for me, it costs about $25 just to buy a single faction. And for that reason, no matter how good they are, and I really do like Penguins, Sheep not so much, but I think Penguins are really fun, and I like the look of Goblins and Knights of the Round Table. You cannot justify paying $25 plus for a single faction, and that's the sole reason for me why they are not necessary. Now, if you're a US-based player and you can pick these up for $10 and like shipping's maybe $1 or $2, it might be worthwhile. It's probably on the high end of cost for a single faction, but for me, it just can't be justified, and that is the reason. Unless and until AEG open up a way of actually getting these factions out to a worldwide audience for a reasonable cost, they're going to remain not necessary for me. So I can bundle all 4 of those into that camp as well. So let's take a look at what have we got over here. Let's do science fiction double feature. And for me, this one, again, is probably in the minimum requirements one. Now, this is a reasonably early expansion. You get 4 decent factions here, I think, but it's fairly bog standard. There's nothing particularly special in there. You get Cyborg Apes, which are a good play on minion action. You get Super Spies, which are a deck manipulation faction. You get Time Travelers, which focus on sort of extra actions, and then you get Shapeshifters, who have some unique minions and unique actions, but nothing really stands out here for me. It's quite a middle-of-the-road, bog-standard expansion here. There's nothing that I would say, these factions are really, really good, and they offer the archetypal play style for that particular mechanic. So, play on minion or deck manipulation and things like that. As I say, I think this one's probably middle of the pack for me. Let's do bigger, geekier box. And I would say this one is probably in the wait for a sale category. It maybe moves up to minimum requirements if you have bought a lot of stuff, because you'll find that the core set box or whichever box you have is getting full pretty quickly and storage becomes an issue. So you will need to eventually pick up the bigger, geekier box if you are buying a lot of this game. However, for now, I'd say it's definitely wait for a sale, because you get two factions. You get the Geeks and the All-Stars, and I like both of those factions. I think they're both quite strong. They're both interesting factions to play. The Geeks are a very controversial one, and they're a sort of love them or hate them faction, but the All-Stars, I think, are a very solid all-round faction. The reason it's wait for a sale is the box price, basically. It's around, for me, like £20 to £25 in the UK, and that is expensive for what is essentially just a box and two factions. So again, it's probably one, if you can pick it up on the cheap or pick it up in a sale, I would definitely do that. But if, as I say, if you're picking up a lot of the stuff, it probably becomes a sort of minimum requirement for playing the game as well. Another one for me that goes in wait for a sale is probably Big in Japan. Now, I've gone back and forth on Titans quite a lot in my time playing the game. This was actually one of the later expansions that I picked up, just because I wasn't really sold on Titans. I think they are quite different to what you're used to when playing the game. They're not really I wouldn't describe them as a seamless integration like power counters were with Monster Smash. I actually think that it takes time to get used to including that in the game. But once you've played with them enough, it does become, normal, really. There's nothing particularly out there. And I think these factions definitely offer really unique theming if you're particularly inclined in terms of the theming of the factions. You've got your sort of your Godzilla faction in Kaiju. You've got Magical Girls, which I think is based on some kind of anime, I assume. You've got Power Rangers in there as well, the Mega Trooper faction. And then you've got Itty Critters, which are essentially just Pokemon. So you've got some really interesting sort of Japanese thematic factions in there. And I think they're all quite different in terms of playstyle as well. So Mega Troopers are a great special faction. Kaiju, really good play on base faction as well. Itty Critters have that unique playstyle of they're using their the little minions to come in and out of the deck, representing that kind of Pokeball coming in and out of play kind of thing. And then Magical Girls are like a unique kind of swarm faction, really, where they benefit from having a lot of minions on base, but they don't necessarily want to. It's kind of that play-off between breaking the base, but then also as well keeping those powerful abilities in play. So there, you've got some really interesting ones there, but I don't think this is necessary unless you're going for the kind of completionist look on Smash Up, because although these are good, it is very different. It's not your bog standard Smash Up in terms of it does add that extra kind of mechanic or extra element to the game in. And it's one that I would probably just wait for a sale. As I say, wait for a 2-for-1 sale on the AEG store and then get this if you are picking up quite a lot of Smash Up stuff already. But I certainly wouldn't start with Big in Japan. And another one in that camp is, I'm going to put Oops, You Did It Again, actually, as well. Now, this is a really interesting one because I love Oops, You Did It Again. I think the Egyptians and the Vikings, and even to an extent the Samurai, are really good factions. The reasons that I put it in wait for a sale are that I think that this expansion is definitely one that it's the mechanics of the faction, I suppose. So you've got burying for the ancient Egyptians, you've got dueling for the cowboys, and to an extent the samurai, and then you've got stealing cards from the Vikings. Now, I think burying is fantastic. It's not particularly complicated to get your head around. However, it's the only faction in the game that does burying, and for that reason it can be quite confusing for newer players. Dueling, I think, is a convoluted mess, and I absolutely hate dueling and the way it's been implemented into the game. And it's primarily for that reason, as well as stealing cards to the Vikings. Again, that's a more seamless integration because it doesn't add any new rules or new mechanics. It just involves taking cards from other players and adding them to your hand. However, I think that is potentially a controversial one. It's very take that, and people don't really like that necessarily in games, although Smash Up is quite a take that game. But for me, it's because it adds all these different things, the dueling, the burying, the stealing cards, that I'm going to put it in wait for a sale, because it's probably one you should pick up later in the game if you're just looking to pick up and complete the game, basically. And as I say, that's the primary reason I'm going to put it in wait for a sale. So let's put one in Essential. So I'm going to put It's Your Fault in Essential. And not only do you get the extra faction in It's Your Fault, you get Tornadoes, so you get a 5-faction release. So that it's already good value for money. You get 3 absolutely incredible factions in this set as well. You get Mythic Greeks, you get Sharks, and you get Dragons, all three of which I think are top tier, thematic and stellar factions in terms of playstyle. Sharks represent your archetypal destruction faction, Mythic Greeks represent your archetypal extra action faction, and Dragons represent a really good disruption faction as well. Not only that, but you get Tornadoes, who are, again, archetypal special and movement faction, and then Superheroes, which are a really good thematic faction. They offer something very different in your power 2, 5 power 2s and 4 power 5s. So I think this one is just an absolute slam dunk. Every Smash Up owner should have this expansion. And I think it's one of those faction expansions where I'd argue that if you've got this and any other expansion, you can create lots of really great pairings. So if you've got this and, I don't know, Awesome Level 9000, you've got Dragon Steampunks, you've got Killer Plant Superheroes, you've got Ghost Mythic Greeks, you've got Bear Cavalry in there as well, another play-on-base faction. Again, you can pair them with the Dragons, you've got Steampunks and Tornadoes, you've got, as I say, you can pair this expansion with any other expansion, have some really great pairings. So for me, this one is absolutely essential. So I'm going to put Cthulhu in not necessary, and again, this one probably won't come as too big a surprise for anyone who's familiar with the channel and for my view on Bigotry Cthulhu. It's one for me that, again, you can kind of pass on. This is actually an expansion that I got rid of just because I didn't particularly like the Madness mechanic, and it's another one that adds in this new deck, so it's Madness cards, but it's only the factions that are in this expansion that use that. So if you're playing the game and one person picks a Madness faction, you're going to have to include that deck. And generally it's one of those ones where if one person picks a Madness faction, all players should kind of pick one, because then it kind of just makes sense, you're incorporating it all together. If it gets to that point where, let's say you're playing 4 players and the last person to pick in their last pick picked a Magnus faction, everyone around the table kind of just sighs for me, because you don't really want to have to be playing with Madness cards. And the reason I don't like Madness is basically because it wastes half your turn. You have to spend half your turn, you only get 1 action play, 1 minion play as a standard, returning that Madness card to the Madness deck, and that's really negative in terms of how I want to play the game. I don't want to just spend half my turn doing nothing. So for me, it's a big miss, a hard pass on Bigotry Cthulhu. You do like the factions in there. There are some interesting cards and interesting factions in there actually as well. So it's not like they're necessarily bad. It's more just Madness cards that really throws this one away for me and puts it in the not necessary camp. But as I say, there are some interesting ones. If you do like the idea, it's very take that. If you do like that idea, again, it's another one you can potentially look to include, but I would definitely say it's passable, and it's not one that you need if you're trying to complete the game. So let's look at a good addition, and I'm going to put in Awesome Level 9000 into that camp. And I think the factions in this one are solid. They're very, very interesting. So Ghosts are a one-of-a-kind faction where you want to try and play down to minimum hand size at various points in the game for extra benefits. Killer Plants are a good kind of search and draw and support faction. Bear Cavalry, another interesting kind of play on base destruction faction, and Steampunks are again another play on base movement faction as well. So I think this one's a really interesting one. Not only that, but you get the extra bases from the core set in this game as well. So they're just a really nice touch to help you. They've got large print on them basically, so you can see the text on the core set bases better. And then also as well, they introduced the talent keyword, which I think was a very good addition. It's now a mainstay, so lots of factions use the word talent. And as I say, it was just a really good addition for very solid factions. And I think this one is worthy of being one of the earlier expansions that you should try and pick up if you can. So let's take a look at that 70s expansion. Yes, that 70s expansion. I'm struggling to read the little text there. So you got Kung Fu Fighters, Disco Dancers, Truckers, and Vigilantes. I'm going to put this one in minimum requirements. And the reason I'm putting this there is that for me, this one is probably, and the fact that I couldn't even recall the name, it's quite a forgettable expansion. You've got some really decent factions actually, but that's kind of about it. So Disco Dancers are quite complicated. They're probably one of the harder factions to play well, but they're based on sort of extra actions and targeting your own minions and other minions as well with certain effects and duplicating those effects. Kung Fu Fighters are quite an interesting power counter one with quite a few talents. Truckers are another play and base action faction. Again, quite forgettable really, because we've got quite a few of those, steampunk, kaiju, ancient Incas and so on, and truckers don't really do anything that all that special in that camp for me. And then you've got vigilantes as well, which are 7 power 4 minion faction. But again, this one just doesn't really, the theme maybe is a bit unusual perhaps. It's not overly inspiring like Big in Japan, because Big in Japan's got a better theme for me. And then the factions themselves don't necessarily do anything special in the category which they're trying to specialize in. So as I say, truckers in that kind of play and base action style, there are better factions that do that. Kung Fu Fighters, power counters, there are better factions that do that. Disco Dancers are very unique, but then there are better factions that do those kind of extra action plays and things like that. And then vigilantes, I think, for example, princesses are better in the interesting, unique minion structure factions that they bring. So for me, this one's quite forgettable, really. Let's take a look at the Culture Shock ones. So International Instant, I'm going to put in as a good addition. And I think this one is, for me, it's a very cool expansion. It's a very interesting expansion as well. You've got some very, very unique, it's quite a difficult expansion to play as well. However, if you can get over that, and maybe if you're a more competent card game player, or you've been playing Smash Up for a while, this one's definitely one that you should add in. You've got Sumo Wrestlers, who are a movement power counter faction, but also playing to the Ghost style of discarding cards as well. You've got Mounties, that are a movement-based faction that thrive on playing into competitive bases and bases where other players are. You've got the Luchadors, who use actions to play onto other players' minions for benefits. So that's a really interesting play style. And then you've got Musketeers, who focus on chaining. So they're probably the most complicated faction to play. You've got lots of extra action plays, lots of draw power in there. You've got another interesting minion structure in your 4 power 4s and 5 power 3s. So this one, as I say, they knocked it out of the park really with both the World Tour sets. I think this one is a really good, sort of very interesting factions in there from a thematic and from a gameplay perspective. So definitely this one is one that you should look to pick up as quickly as you can. And the other end, again, this comes as no surprise, but this one goes in at Essential for me. It's another one that has a 5 faction release. So you've got the Polynesian Voyagers, Incas, Anansi Tales, Grimm's Fairy Tales, and Russian Fairy Tales in there as well. So you've got 5 factions for the price of 4. So not only is it great value from the off, but you've also got 5 really interesting factions for me. And again, this is another quite complicated one. This is probably more at the difficult end. So if you're picking between the two, I'd go for It's Your Fault first, and then pick up this one when you've played Smash Up a bit more. But you've got Incas, which are quite straightforward, but they focus on chaining play on base actions. And I think Incas, for me, possibly Kaiju, are the archetypal play on base faction. If you're going to own one play on base faction, it's either Incas or Kaiju for me. Probably Incas, because they don't have the Titan mechanic in there as well. You've got Polynesian Voyagers, who focus on playing extra bases. Again, a really unique play style, and it plays into, again, it's another thematic one. You've got Anansi Tales, who focus on giving cards to other players for benefits, and then you can play those cards from other players' hands as well. So again, another really interesting mechanic and play style. You've got Russian Fairy Tales, who focus on playing minions off the top of the deck from any player's deck and, transforming those minions. Again, another really interesting one. And then you've got Grimm's Fairy Tales, who focus on playing pairs of minions down for sort of bonus effects. So again, really interesting one, really thematic. I think they've knocked all 5 of these factions out of the park for me, and just great value. So it's no surprise to see it in Essential for me. So we've got 5 left. So let's do Titans next. And for me, this one kind of borders in the not necessary to wait for a sale. And I'm going to put it in wait for a sale because it's one that I think, if you are looking to complete this out, or if you are looking to, you're not particularly phased by Titans, for example, this is one that you could look to pick up early. I think the issue with me for these Titans are that they aren't necessary to play the game, so you don't need this Titan pack to play some of the factions that have Titans, like Wizards, for example. I think the factions that do get Titans from this pack function completely fine without them. Some of them may be slightly weaker without the Titans, but on the whole, I don't think it's a massive issue. I don't think it's necessary really to own these Titans. And the other issue as well is that, again, you've got this whole where can you get them from? These go in and out of print. They can be quite expensive to buy directly from the AEG store if you don't live in United States of America. So there's those pricing elements to me. If you can get it on a sale, definitely try and do that. And then it's the whole, it adds Titans into the game, which again, for me, is similar to Big in Japan. It's a very different mechanic into the game, and it feels a bit off the first few times you play it, but it does get there. However, I suppose for me, actually, I'm gonna move this to not necessary. I'm talking myself down. For me, the problem with this is that some of the Titans in this pack, they massively swing their factions. So the classic example is Dagon for Innsmouth. Innsmouth go from a very low tier faction to an absolute top tier faction just because of one card that was released in a Titan pack. Some of the factions that got Titans really didn't need Titans, in my opinion, or some of the Titans actually add nothing to the faction that they get. I'm thinking perhaps the Tricksters. So for me, it's very hit and miss, the Titan pack, and I think again you've got the issues of, can you pick it up, can you get it for a decent price, all of these things, and the fact that I don't think it's necessary in terms of playing the game. You can own all of these factions and not need the Titans and still think that Wizards, for example, are competitive, or Tricksters are competitive. Yes, they may have less optimal pairings without the Titan, but still, I just don't think it's necessary. So we've got 4 left. I'm going to put Pretty Pretty. It's a close one for me, this, between a good edition and essential, and it's one of my favorite expansions, and I'm going to put it in essential, but I wouldn't hate putting it in good edition as well. Pretty Pretty for me, again, it's another really interesting expansion mechanic wise and theme wise. So you've got kitty cats, princesses, fairies, and mythic horses. And I think mythic horses for me are the archetypal swarm faction. I know everyone says robots, but mythic horses are, I think, a much more balanced swarm faction than robots. You've got a lot of power there, but it's not necessarily uncontrolled power like the robots have, where you can get those massive, great big chains with the robots that completely swings games. You've got princesses, which I think are an excellent, unique minion structure faction with the 6 power 5s. You've got some really interesting actions in there. You've got some really interesting princess abilities, and everyone knows that I massively rate Eliza as a very, very interesting single card counter to a lot of other factions as well. You've got kitty cats, again, I think are another very interesting, unique playstyle faction. And again, another quite reasonably thematic one in the cats are always destroying things. And then you've got fairies, which are another interesting transferring faction. So they transfer player minion actions around, and they've got some really interesting sort of minions in there as well. So I think this one, again, it's another one for me that I really enjoy the 4 factions in here. I think they create lots of great pairings with another faction. So you've got princesses with superheroes, you've got mythic horses with other swarm factions, you've got kitty cats with factions that have protection against destruction, you've got fairies with things like lucadors and other player minion factions. So you've got some really interesting positive picks, and you've got some really interesting counter picks in here as well, if you've got a decent sized collection. So for me, I'd put that one in essential. So we've got Cease and Desist, and I think Cease and Desist for me is one that is probably going to go in minimum requirements. I could see putting it in Wait for a Sale, because it's one that I think it's got some really interesting thematic factions in here. So you've got your Game of Thrones, you've got Star Trek, you've got Star Wars, and you've got Transformers. I think certainly for me, the Game of Thrones, so Ignobles, are a very complicated faction to play, and I don't think they get a lot of love. I quite enjoy them, but as I say, they are quite complicated and they'll often just be left in the box and people just won't pick them. I think the other 3 factions are fine. I think Changerbots, the Transformer faction, are quite weak for me. I know they're some people's favourite, but for me, I tend not to pick them. And again, it's just one that I think they're good thematic factions, but I don't think you really miss anything from not having any of these factions. They don't really offer you anything. I suppose Ignobles are the only one that offers you anything unique in giving your own minions away and taking them back. The other 3 are just fairly standard factions, and I don't think they offer anything new in terms of gameplay or mechanics that really justify owning them. So I'm going to put this one in minimum requirements. The last two, so Monster Smash, werewolves, vampires, giant ants, and mad scientists. And this one's probably a close call. I think I like giant ants, werewolves, and mad scientists. I think they're all really interesting factions, and they all add the new, they add power counters, which were new at this point in the game. But you've got vampires, which drop it right down as well. Vampires are one of the worst factions in the game. They're ones to benefit from the Titan, and the Titan is quite good actually for the vampires. But I'm going to put it in a good addition because I do like these factions. I think the addition of power counters was an excellent mechanic into the game that really was seamless as well. I suppose it actually came into the game quite late comparatively in terms of positive changes to the game. But yeah, I think this one is really, really very interesting. Interestingly, 3 of the factions got Titans, so you could argue that you have to really own the Titan pack to own this one, but I don't necessarily think that's the case. I think werewolves are fine without the Titan. The Titan just blows them away, really. Giant ants are fine without the Titan. The Titan makes them a lot better because they need extra action plays, but you can just pair giant ants with a faction that gives you those extra action plays. Mythic Greeks, for example, again, looking back at the top level there, are ones that will give you that. Kitty Cats are again another great pairing for giant ants. So both of those factions would offer you a great pairing for giant ants, and you don't need the Titan really to make them effective. Mad Scientists, again, you think about your classic Uber Serum and First Mate combination. The counter for all of these is they don't have draw, so this isn't a fast expansion. If you're looking for an expansion that adds lots of pace to the game, so Marvel, for example, is a great addition where all the factions have draw cards, and generally the faster the game is, the more draw you have, the more likely it is that you'll see all your sort of combinations and things like that, and all your best cards, and really achieve the payoff that your pairing is kind of working towards. So this one's quite a slow expansion, but I think it's a really good addition to the game. And then lastly, what were we thinking? We've got teddy bears, rock stars, grannies, and explorers. And this one for me, again, it kind of hovers between a good addition and minimum requirements. I'm going to put it in minimum requirements because I can't say that 70s expansion is forgettable and not say that what we're thinking is also forgettable, because thematically they're not necessarily the strongest here. The factions are a bit unusual potentially as well. Grannies, teddy bears, explorers, and rock stars. It's not particularly a mainstream one, let's say, but I think the factions in it are solid. There aren't any of them that I think, oh, this one's this is a horrible faction, I would never want to play with it, because you've got some interesting cards in there, you've got some interesting mechanics in there. You've got Grannies, who I think are the archetypal deck manipulation faction. They've got a very smooth draw engine if you can get it going. They're one of my favourite factions to play personally. You've got Rockstars, who are the archetypal draw faction, again, and they want the one that focus on base power as well, so it's again another really interesting gameplay one. You've got Explorers, which focus on movement, as well as kind of exploring bases, I suppose, new bases. So you've got the Crypt Looters in there, you've got the Harrison Jones in there. Is that what it's called? I can't remember what I think it's Harrison Jones or something like that. The King Minion, who brings a new base into play and you can get a single base break. And you've got Teddy Bears, who are a low power minion structure, but they've got some really interesting cards in there, draw cards, specials, things like that. So there's just an interesting one in general. But for me, again, I think it can be potentially quite a forgettable one, and one that you should only look to really add once you've kind of got this lot ticked off. So that's really my kind of expansion purchase guide, really. I mixed up expansion and faction quite a lot. Apologies, it's when you're doing this sort of off the cuff, it can be quite difficult because you say both those words quite a lot throughout the video. But what do you think of my sort of expansion purchase guide? Where would you put certain expansions? And I know that things like Cthulhu, Munchkin, Marvel, the single pack releases, big in Japan, they're potentially going to be ones that are most likely to change on people's lists, so move up and down. Marvel's one that I can definitely see would be not necessary, but for me, I think it's a really fun, really good addition to the game in terms of the factions all being quite interesting. You've got very different mechanics in there, and just generally quite powerful as well. It holds up well with the rest of the game at this point. So that's it for me. Let me know what you think down in the comments below, and I will see you all next time. Goodbye.